I've just completed a full playthrough of Double Dragon Revive, and let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I absolutely loved it. Sure, it's janky in places, but let's be honest, this series has always been as rough around the edges as Charlie Sheen's career. None of that stopped me from having a ridiculous amount of fun. The game delivers exactly what it promises, a perfect mix of nostalgia and modern flair, all wrapped up in a big, punchy love letter to the beat-em-up genre. But here's where things take a turn for the absurd. After finishing the game, I decided to see what the so-called professionals thought of it. To my shock and amusement, IGN slapped this charming brawler with a 5 out of 10. 5! To put that into perspective, this is the same outlet that handed Concord and Dustborn a 7 out of 10, two of the biggest digital disasters in recent memory. According to IGN, Double Dragon Revive is apparently even worse than those. Now, I get it, they've got a big team, different reviewers, different tastes. Fine, but you'd still expect at least some consistency from an organisation that claims to represent industry standards. Yet the more I looked into it, the clearer it became that the problem wasn't the score, it was how they arrived at it. Because, and I can't believe I'm even saying this, they reviewed a Double Dragon game, one of the most iconic co-op franchises in gaming history, by playing it alone. That's right, their reviewer sat there playing with themselves and then had the nerve to complain they didn't have a good time. Of course they didn't. It's Double Dragon, not Single Bloke Sadness Simulator. I, on the other hand, didn't play with myself. Like a good man, I did it with my wife, which I'll tell you all about soon. As for IGN playing single player, they didn't disclose this fact, but the gameplay footage used suggests this was the case. Reviewing the game through purely such a lens is ridiculous. IGN apparently thought it was perfectly acceptable to review a 2-player brawler with a 1-player brain cell. They sat there playing Double Dragon solo and then acted shocked when it wasn't as fun. It would be like playing Mario 64 with a steering wheel and moaning you didn't have a good time. I mean, sure, you can do it, but it ruins part of the fun. Maybe if they'd spent more time playing with someone else, they'd have realised what makes Double Dragon great. Smashing skulls side by side, reveling in that timeless couch co-op chaos the series was built on. So since the so-called professionals clearly can't be trusted to do their homework, allow me to show you how it's done. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is Double Dragon Revive played the right way. 2 fists, 2 players, 1 glorious return of an arcade legend. Yeah. Beat 'em ups, they're usually short, sweet and straight to the point, and Double Dragon Revive is no exception. It doesn't waste your time with bloated side quests or endless cutscenes, it just throws you into the action and lets the punches do the talking. Best of all, it launched at a fraction of the price of your average overhyped, overlong AAA snooze fest. But here's where it gets even better. Because you watched this video, you don't even have to pay full price. Use my link down below to grab Double Dragon Revive on Steam with 30% off. And if you've already picked it up, don't worry, the pinned comment will take you to thousands of other games with discounts of up to 90%. Happy shopping, and now let's dive into this gloriously chaotic return of an arcade classic franchise. Full transparency here, if you've been watching this channel for a while, you already know I was deeply skeptical about Double Dragon Revive from the moment it was announced. The early footage didn't exactly fill me with confidence, the graphics looked low budget, the pseudo 3D gameplay seemed questionable, and the trailer had all the charm of a mobile game ad rather than the prestige you'd expect from a franchise as legendary as Double Dragon. And let's be honest, this series doesn't exactly have the cleanest track record. There have been many dreadful Double Dragon games over the decades, so when I saw how drastically different this one looked from its predecessor, Double Dragon Gaiden Rise of the Dragons, which for the record I think is excellent, I couldn't help but wonder what on earth the developers were thinking. That said, even back in those old, highly critical uploads, I made one thing clear. I hoped I'd be wrong. I wanted Double Dragon Revive to surprise me, and I'm pleased to say it absolutely did. Once I actually got my hands on it, all that skepticism melted away. The game turned out to be far more fun, fluid and satisfying than I dared to expect. As I mentioned, I adore Double Dragon Gaiden. I genuinely thought its successor would follow in those footsteps, and while Revive takes things in a completely different direction, I can honestly say it won me over. Gaiden remains one of my favourite modern beat-em-ups of all time. I've gone back to it more times than even Streets of Rage 4 or Shredder's Revenge. However, while I was a big fan of Gaiden, I remember all too well that not everyone shared my enthusiasm. When I covered that game here on YouTube, a sizable chunk of the Double Dragon fandom were quick to make their feelings known. They thought it looked far too chibi and cutesy and longed for a return to the gritty, hard-edged style of the old arcade days. Well, with Double Dragon Revive, those fans have finally got their wish. It's darker, gruffer, and far more serious in tone. Exactly what many were asking for. Admittedly, it's not quite the Double Dragon I'd personally been craving, but it still managed to win me over with its charm, energy, and sheer playability. So let me explain exactly why, despite all my doubts, I ended up having such a great time with it. After a slick little intro animation that perfectly sets the tone, we're dropped straight into a player select screen and faced with the classic choice. Do you pick Jimmy or Bimmy? From the moment I powered up Double Dragon Revive, I did what any true fan of the series would do. Grab a second controller and roped in a partner for some proper old school couch co-op mayhem. And honestly, from the very first punch, it felt like Double Dragon. The soundtrack instantly hit that familiar nostalgic tone. The urban backdrops oozed that gritty charm, albeit this time rendered in shiny polygons instead of chunky old school pixels. And the characters, enemies and overall atmosphere immediately transported me back to those golden arcade days. Most importantly, the combat felt right. Controlling the Lee brothers stringing together combos and pulling off those flashy special moves had that same satisfying tactile weight the series has always been known for. In short, it plays like the Double Dragon you remember, just with a fresh coat of paint and a few new tricks, including full directional movement that adds a welcome layer of depth. There's plenty to unpack on that front, but before we start swinging fists and throwing elbows, let's talk about the story. The game opens with a scrolling wall of text that retells the classic 1980s tale most fans will recognise. Double Dragon once again takes place in a post-nuclear wasteland, a lawless, chaotic world where society has completely collapsed. In this version, California has essentially turned into Somalia, but with neon lights. The infamous Shadow Warriors gang are once again trying to seize control of what's left of civilization, and when reports surface of missing civilians, including the ever unlucky Marion, our two Satsukan masters, Bimmy and Jimmy, take it upon themselves to restore a bit of order the only way they know how, with their fists. Stage 1 kicks off in the warehouse district, and right from the get-go it looks and feels like classic Double Dragon, but this time the Lee brothers' new 8-way directional movement gives you far more space to brawl, dodge and dish out punishment than ever before. I'll admit I was a little nervous about this change. Games that have tried this semi-3D movement before, like Fighting Falls, never quite nail the fluidity or tightness of the true side-scrolling beat-em-ups like Streets of Rage, but thankfully my fears were completely unfounded. Double Dragon Revive controls beautifully, smooth, responsive and surprisingly natural for a game blending old mechanics with new movement. As we smashed our way through the first wave of thugs, that familiar Stage 1 theme blasted out of the speakers, and a real sense of nostalgia hit me. It's Double Dragon through and through, just with a fresh modern polish that makes the punches land harder than ever. As with any good old-fashioned beat-em-up, weapons are scattered across the floor, just begging to be picked up and smashed over someone's head. And of course, the classic combos and hurricane kicks make their glorious return. But Double Dragon Revive doesn't just rest on nostalgia, it builds on it, and a few clever new mechanics like Dragon Orbs, finishing blows, and even a touch of parkour. Here's how it works. As you fight, your Dragon Orb gauge fills up. Once it hits 100%, you can unleash a devastating finishing blow, conveniently indicated by a little icon floating above your enemy's head. Different moves fill the gauge at different rates, so mixing up your attacks isn't just stylish, it's tactical. When the time comes to deliver that finishing blow, the results are glorious. These attacks hit like a truck, blasting everyone in the vicinity with a flashy area of effect strike. And if your target's health bar has gone red, prepare yourself for the ultimate satisfaction, an instant knockout that sends them flying. Then there are critical assaults. Those flashy attacks surrounded by a blue aura. Land one of these and you'll not only deal massive damage, but also supercharge your Dragon Orb gauge in the process. Time it right and you can even counter enemy blows with armoured moves, adding another layer of skill and swagger to every fight. And to top it all off, the game introduces those parkour actions I mentioned. By pressing the right button mid-jump near a wall, your character can pull off slick wall jumps, and if you chain them into an aerial attack, you'll unleash a hyper blow. An explosive move that hits a wide area and turns the entire screen into chaos. It's pure mayhem, the kind of over-the-top fun that reminds you why Double Dragon still punches above its weight. Throughout each stage, you'll also spot various glowing objects in the environments that you can interact with, and they're not just for show. You can kick enemies into fridges, smash them into wheelie bins, and generally turn the scenery into your own personal arsenal of pain. It's bloody brilliant. Now, everything I've talked about so far on the whole is absolutely marvellous, but as I mentioned right at the start, Double Dragon Revive isn't without its fair share of jank. And the biggest offender, without question, is the game's atrocious platforming.
Seriously?
I wouldn't even call it frustrating, that would be too kind. It's so bad, it's hilarious. Try doing it in co-op and you'll spend more time falling off ledges than punching enemies. The jumps require pixel-perfect precision, yet the game's sense of depth feels misleading, making it absurdly easy to misjudge where you'll land. To make matters worse, if one player charges ahead, the slower one gets dragged off screen by the advancing camera, plunging straight into the abyss. It's an utter mess, pure slapstick chaos masquerading as a platforming section. But then again, maybe that's the most authentic part of the whole experience. After all, terrible platforming has been a proud Double Dragon tradition since 1987. Trying to jump across a gap in this series has always been like playing Russian roulette with gravity. In a weird way, it's almost admirable. Revive stays so true to its roof that it even faithfully recreates the bits that have always been rubbish. Thankfully, these moments are far and few between, and honestly they're so ridiculous you can't help but laugh. As long as you don't take them seriously, you and your co-op partner will probably end up howling rather than raging. As you progress through the campaign, you'll start out with just the Lee brothers, but eventually unlock both Marion and Ranzu, a slick ninja fighter. Each brings their own style and flair to the brawling. Together, these new additions do wonders for replayability. They don't just feel like cosmetic extras, they genuinely change how the game is played. Marion brings spectacle, Ranzu brings finesse and speed, and the Lee brothers keep things grounded in that old school brutality. It's a well-rounded cast that gives Double Dragon Revive a level of variety the series has rarely achieved before, making a second playthrough not just worthwhile but practically irresistible. What Double Dragon Revive manages to do better than any previous entry is breathe new life into its world and characters. For a series that's traditionally been lighter on story than a crisp packet, this one actually takes the time to build atmosphere, personality, and a real sense of purpose. It's still gloriously camp and over the top, of course. This is Double Dragon, but for once it feels like there's a genuine world behind all the punching. The Lee brothers aren't just nameless avatars of fury anymore, they actually have presence and personality. Billy is the classic hero type, determined, noble, and maybe just a touch naive, while Jimmy has that rougher, more impulsive edge, the yin to his brother's yang. Their interactions in cutscenes, brief as they are, help sell the idea that they're not just brawlers but brothers, and that bond forms the emotional backbone of the story. Then there's Marion. Gone are the days of her being kidnapped like clockwork every other Tuesday. This time she's presented as a hardened survivor, armed to the teeth and more than capable of looking after herself. On paper that sounds great, but the execution leaves a bit of a sour taste. When you finally reach the stage where you're meant to rescue her, the big moment unfolds exactly as you'd expect from today's parade of predictable storytelling cliches. Just as you're gearing up for that classic triumphant save, Marion boots the boss square in the face and smugly declares she was working undercover the whole time and didn't actually need rescuing. It's that same eye-rolling, performatively strong female twist we've seen 100 times before, and instead of feeling empowering, it just comes across as painfully contrived. What's frustrating is that it didn't have to be this way. You can have the satisfaction of saving a beloved character while still allowing her to be strong and capable in her own right. The two ideas aren't mutually exclusive. Needing help from others now and then doesn't make a character weak. It makes them human, and stripping that vulnerability away in the name of modern strength just ends up making everyone feel a little bit less real. But this is more of a critique from me of the double standards of modern culture itself, rather than the substance of this game. The ninja character in Double Dragon Revive is, of course, Ranzu, and he's one of the game's most stylish and satisfying additions. He instantly stands out from the rest of the roster thanks to his blistering speed, slick animations, and precision-focused moveset. And of course, it wouldn't be Double Dragon without a rogues gallery of gloriously over-the-top villains. The infamous Shadow Warrior gang returns in all of their brutal punk rock glory, but this time they've been reimagined with far more style and menace. Each faction within the gang has its own visual identity and hierarchy, from street-level thugs to more exotic martial artists and cyber-enhanced freaks. Longtime fans will also be pleased to see that classic enemies like Linda, Abobo, Williams and Roper have finally been given the treatment they deserve. These familiar faces have been mainstays of the Double Dragon universe since the 1980s, but Revive reimagines them with more presence than ever before. Linda is no longer just a token whip-wielding femme fatale, she's a proper threat, oozing attitude with every strike and looking like she's just strutted out of an 80s post-apocalyptic fashion show. Abobo, the eternal wall of muscle, has never looked better or bigger. His redesign walks the perfect line between intimidating and absurd, with every punch feeling like it could level a small building. Meanwhile, Williams and Roper, the ever-present street punks who've been punching bags for nearly 4 decades, like Linda and Abobo, have been upgraded to stage bosses with storylines and dialogue, finally giving them swagger like never before. Speaking of boss fights, in my opinion, they are one of the funnest things about the whole game. The boss fights in Double Dragon Revive are easily some of the best the series has ever seen, because each one feels like a proper event. Every major encounter feels like a spectacle and a sense of escalation that keeps the action from ever feeling repetitive. Rather than simply throwing larger, stronger versions of regular thugs at you, Revive treats each boss as a showcase of creativity, forcing you to adapt, react, and think on your feet. Each battle feels distinct. Some bosses test your spacing and timing, while others unleash environmental hazards that turn the entire arena into a deadly playground. They push you to master the game's mechanics, the parries, the directional dodges, and those satisfying dragon orb finishers, all while staying true to that old school beat-em-up rhythm. On top of that, the presentation is phenomenal. Each boss comes with a dramatic entrance, from camera sweeps and tilting animations to pounding musical cues that perfectly capture the tension. Fights feel cinematic without sacrificing the raw arcade energy that defines Double Dragon, and for fans of the series, the callbacks are amazing. Classic villains return with reworked designs and new movesets that pay homage to their origins while giving them modern flair. In short, the boss fights in Double Dragon Revive aren't just obstacles, they're the highlight of the experience. They deliver the adrenaline, the nostalgia, and the satisfaction of the triumph that every great brawler lives or dies by. From all of this, you can probably tell, despite its shortcomings, I am rather fond of this game. So, let's see what IGN's final thoughts were. They would summarise that Double Dragon Revive feels less like a return to glory that its title might suggest, and more like a police sketch of someone trying to describe what the series they loved looked like from memory. There's the important detail you'd need to identify it by. Simple combat with big super attacks, peacocking bad guys of all shapes and sizes, the subway, casino and elevator stages required by law to be in games like this. But none of it feels distinct or special, and the parts in which it's passable get held back by wonky, unresponsive controls and maddening difficulty spikes. Revival suggests reinvigoration, but this feels more like exhuming a shambling corpse. Now, that sort of criticism would be perfectly fair. After all, reviews are just opinions. If it came from someone who'd actually experienced the game the way it was designed to be played. But according to IGN's own review footage, the reviewer played the entire thing solo, which immediately undermines the whole evaluation. Double Dragon was built around co-op. It's the burning heart of the franchise. Judging a co-op brawler after playing it alone is like reviewing a band after only listening to one instrument. Of course it's not going to sound right. What makes it even worse is that this isn't disclosed anywhere in the review. There's no mention of co-op in the write-up, and no indication that the reviewer even tried that mode that defines the entire series. It's quietly brushed aside, as if Double Dragon was ever meant to be a solo experience only. That omission completely changes the context of the criticism. They're not reviewing Double Dragon Revive as it was intended. They're reviewing half of a game. And when a major outlet like IGN ignores such a fundamental feature, it doesn't just shortchange the developers, it misleads the entire audience too. And that's the real tragedy here. What we're left with now is a perfectly decent, if admittedly flawed, game saddled with an abysmally low score from one of the biggest gaming outlets on the planet. Like it or not, IGN still carries enormous weight in the industry. Their verdicts sit atop of Metacritic pages, get echoed by aggregators, and often shape the public's perception of a title before most people have even touched it. So instead of being seen for what it truly is, a scrappy, nostalgic brawler with plenty of heart and a few rough edges, Double Dragon Revive will be dismissed by countless potential players as yet another failed revival. And that's not just unfair to the developers, it's bad for the health of the genre as a whole. Beat-em-ups thrive on word of mouth and co-op enthusiasm, not corporate apathy. A single carelessly handled review from a major outlet can cripple that momentum before it even starts, leaving a good game buried under a headline it never deserved. What makes this whole situation even more infuriating is that it's not even the first time this website has done this to Double Dragon. IGN pulled a similar stunt over a decade ago with Double Dragon Neon, a game that, while divisive at launch, went on to become one of the most beloved beat-em-ups of its era. When Neon first dropped in 2012, IGN slapped it with a painfully low 3 out of 10, calling it clunky, outdated, and supposedly missing the spirit of the originals. Yet over time, that very same game developed a huge cult following. Players who actually gave it a fair shake discovered that beneath its tongue-in-cheek humour and 80s cheese was a brilliantly designed co-op brawler with incredible soundtrack work from Jake Kaufman, satisfying combat depth, and some of the most entertaining local multiplayer the genre had seen in years. The irony? The very things IGN mocked it for back then, its retro energy, self-aware tone and exaggerated style, are precisely what fans now celebrate it for. Double Dragon Neon went from being branded as a joke to being fondly remembered as one of the best modern interpretations of the franchise. So, seeing history repeat itself with Double Dragon Revive is maddening. Once again, a major outlet has dismissed the game before truly understanding it, and in doing so, risks burying another passionate revival of a legendary series under the weight of an uninformed score. Regardless if you love or hate it, for this very reason, I never reduce art to a number out of 10. It's a ridiculous way to measure something as subjective as enjoyment. Games aren't equations you can grade, they're experiences, shaped by how you play them, who you play them with, and what you bring to them. Slapping a number on that and pretending it represents universal truth is lazy criticism at best. A score might be tidy for SEO, but it tells you nothing about the soul of a game. And Double Dragon Revive has plenty of that, even if it isn't perfect. Don't forget, if you haven't tried it out for yourself yet, you can use my links down below to grab Double Dragon Revive on Steam with 30% off. And if you've already picked it up, don't worry, the pinned comment will take you to thousands of other games with discounts of up to 90% off. So happy shopping, and I'll see you all again soon. Cheerio!